I met Mason on a late afternoon in the university library in Philadelphia. I was struggling with a stack of books when he stepped in and gently helped me before everything tumbled to the floor. It wasn't some cinematic meet-cute, but the moment our eyes met, I paused. His smile was warm, his light brown eyes sincere, so much so that I didn't doubt him for a second. He was polite, thoughtful, and had a calm presence that made you feel safe. We dated for 2 years. Mason worked in finance, and I had just started my career as a public high school teacher in the city. When he got down on one knee in Rittenhouse Square, the place where we had our first date, I didn't hesitate for a moment. Our wedding was small and cozy, held in the backyard of my parents' house in New Jersey, with just close family and a few dear friends. I thought I was starting the perfect chapter of my life. The first few years after the wedding were sweet. We lived in a tiny apartment in Fishtown, not fancy but enough for 2 young dreamers. Every evening I tutored after school to save up for a house, and Mason stayed up late working on spreadsheets and financial reports. We weren't flush with cash, but we had enough to get by, and enough love to carry us through the hard parts. But life isn't as simple as those quiet, jazz-filled evenings under warm light. Rent kept going up, groceries and living costs climbed, and Mason never seemed to move forward in his job. The soft conversations we once had turned into tired sighs and long, uncomfortable silences. I started noticing how Mason avoided talking about money. He'd give vague answers whenever I asked about our savings or plans for buying a house. I didn't want to pressure him, so I chose to believe he was just feeling the weight of responsibility. I thought if I stayed patient and kept working hard, everything would eventually fall into place. Then one Friday night, while I was fixing dinner, just a box of dry pasta and frozen veggies, Mason walked into the kitchen looking like a stranger. He stood there for a long moment, still holding his car keys, as if he was battling something inside. Then he spoke, voice dry, emotionless. "Leah, I need to tell you something." I set the spoon down and turned to him. "What is it?" He took a deep breath and let out the words like a cold blade. "My family's in trouble, financially. My parents and sister are about to lose their house. They owe around $75,000. I froze. My first reaction wasn't anger, it was fear. That number was so big it made everything around me feel like it had stopped. 75,000? I repeated, my voice tight. Mason nodded, avoiding my eyes. They were scammed in an investment, lost everything. If they don't pay it off, they could get sued. The house will be foreclosed, everything could disappear. I don't even remember how I ended up sitting down. My hands were trembling, but my mind was crystal clear, even as panic roared inside. "And you're telling me this because—" He looked at me. The eyes I once trusted without question were now filled with worry. "I can't let them lose everything," I thought. "If we help, they could keep the house, start over, they're my family." I let out a short laugh, not from humor but from bitterness. In that moment, all the arguments, all the tension, all the unanswered questions, they all traced back to that number. And now it was sitting squarely on my shoulders, with no warning. I thought long and hard after Mason told me everything. I couldn't sleep that night. The numbers swirled through my mind. $75,000, more than 2 years of my teacher's salary, the total of everything I'd saved since graduating college. It was also enough to destroy every plan we'd ever made. A little house in the suburbs, our first child, or at least a real vacation. But then I looked at Mason lying beside me, his shoulders tense from trying to hold back a sigh. In that moment, I didn't see an irresponsible husband or a weak man. I saw someone cornered, torn between love and duty, and I loved him with everything I had. So the next morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee, pulled out my savings book, and started making a list. I couldn't do it with just cash, but I had other assets. My grandmother's jewelry, stored in an old wooden box, something I once promised I'd only use for special occasions. I never imagined that special occasion would be saving my in-laws' home. I called a bank and requested refinancing on the small condo we were leasing to own. They agreed at a slightly higher interest rate. I texted the principal and asked for more evening tutoring shifts. 2 days later, I started taking on 3 extra sessions a week at students' homes, and on weekends I tutored at a community center in the immigrant neighborhood. My life stretched thin. I was up at 5 a.m., home past 9 p.m., grabbing bites of stale bread and paying bills under the harsh glow of a desk lamp. Every dollar I made went on the budget sheet stuck to our fridge. I knew Mason saw it. He started picking up extra freelance projects too, but most of the time he hid away in the office, his phone ringing constantly. Sometimes I heard his mom on the line, her voice high and anxious. Nearly 4 months later, we finally had enough. On the day of the last transfer, I sat alone on the couch, staring at our bank account balance, just a few $100s left. Mason wasn't home. He said he had to meet a friend to talk about work. I didn't blame him. I figured at least we'd have dinner together that night, maybe a long hug, a thank you. But when Mason came home, all he had was a bag of fast food and an exhausted face. I told him it was done, that his family was safe now. He just nodded. No thank you, no I owe you everything, just a nod, like I'd reminded him the electric bill was paid. I forced a smile, telling myself people react differently to stress. Maybe his parents would call, say something, anything. But no one called, no messages, no check-ins. I began to feel the distance growing. Every night, Mason stayed up late, but he no longer told me about work. The rare dinners we shared grew quieter, and what worried me most was his eyes. They were no longer looking at me. One Saturday afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and there stood Carmen, Mason's sister. Her eyes swept across the apartment like she was inspecting it, then she stepped inside without waiting. Well, looks the same, she said, smirking. Mason said you're good at making things work, but it's all done now, right? My parents are much better off. I stayed quiet. Something in her tone chilled me. Carmen looked me straight in the eyes, voice light as air. Honestly, you don't need to try so hard anymore. My family never really saw you as one of us. I stood frozen, each word hitting like a blow to the chest. She didn't shout, she wasn't angry, but her indifference was more cutting than contempt. The door clicked shut behind her. I stood there, still holding a half-folded towel. For the first time, I realized my sacrifice had felt like nothing more than a receipt. Paid and forgotten. I'd always believed the worst things happened to other people, not me. I wasn't perfect, but I lived kindly, loved Mason with all my heart, and gave everything I had for what we called family. But on that Wednesday night, everything I believed shattered in an instant. I had just gotten home after a long tutoring session, body aching, carrying a bag of marked-down groceries from the store near school. The apartment was eerily quiet, lit only by the dim glow from the living room lamp, casting a shadow that felt like a warning. Mason was sitting on the couch, hands clasped, eyes distant like he'd already left this world. I set the bag down on the table and looked at him. You're not eating? I got your favorite. Mason didn't answer right away. He just let out a long breath, then looked up. Leah, I need to tell you something. I stood still. Every time he started with those words, it was bad news, but nothing could have prepared me for what he said next. I think I want to separate for a while. I thought I'd misheard. What? I don't know if I can take it anymore. The financial pressure, everything. It's too much. I need some space. I need to get away from here, at least for a while. I laughed, but it wasn't out of humor. Financial pressure, we already made it through that. I've been tutoring nearly every day of the week. We paid off that debt. I know, Mason cut me off, still not looking me in the eye. But you don't understand. Every time I see you exhausted, trying so hard, sacrificing, I feel like a failure. I'm not myself anymore. And your solution is to walk away? My voice rose, full of hurt and disbelief. Walk away from the person who took on your family's debt? Mason didn't answer. He stood up, walked into the bedroom and started packing. Shirt by shirt, socks shoved into a duffel bag like he was going on a short business trip. Not leaving a 6-year marriage. I stood there, watching his back, feeling like the ground had just slipped out from under me. You can go, I said, my voice shaking, but at least tell me, is this about me? Is there someone else? He paused for a beat, then shook his head. No, it's just, I can't keep doing this. Not long after, the door slammed shut behind him. I collapsed onto the floor, tears spilling out even though I felt completely hollow inside. In the days that followed, I kept myself busy. Teaching, cleaning, tutoring. I tried not to think. Not to analyze, not to question. Until I called Maureen, Mason's mother. I thought at the very least she'd offer a few words of sympathy. I had helped her family avoid financial ruin. I'd taken on a debt her daughter once called a lifetime burden. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. Her voice was cold, without a trace of hesitation. "Hello, Leah, I assume you're upset." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I just want to know what's going on. Mason said he needed time. I don't understand why." A soft laugh came through the line. It wasn't mocking, it was cold, dismissive. "Who do you think you are? A low-paid public school teacher thinking she's some kind of savior? Let me be clear. Our family never really thought you were right for Mason." I couldn't believe my ears. "I helped your family." "Yes," she interrupted. "You paid the debt, true. But don't think money buys affection. We don't need your pity, Leah. Mason finally understands that." I was speechless. The call ended with a sharp beep. I let the phone drop to the floor, pain thudding in my chest. I had been betrayed. Not just by Mason, but by his entire family. All of my sacrifices had been dismissed, pushed aside like I was just an outsider who accidentally wandered into their story. But once the hurt settled, what remained wasn't tears. It was a slow-burning fire. I started looking back at everything. Every bill, every transfer, every little detail. I'd once overlooked because I trusted too much, and then I realized something wasn't right. Very not right. They thought I'd step back, that I'd disappear like a forgotten shadow. After that call with Maureen, I had no tears left. Pain no longer came in waves, it turned to stone, silent and sharp. I began doing what I should have done long ago. I started searching for the truth. That night I sat in front of my computer and opened the joint bank account. Something I rarely touched because I always believed Mason was good with money. First mistake. The transaction history stretched on endlessly, and the more I scrolled, the colder my blood ran. There were large withdrawals without explanation, recurring monthly with no clear notes, just labeled internal transfer. I clicked through them. One time $3,200, another $4,800, then $6,000. All funneling into an account under Mason's name, completely separate from our joint account. I pulled up the printed statements Mason used to leave in his desk drawer. He had edited them, cutting transactions, falsifying numbers to make it look like everything was under control. My chest tightened. I printed every piece of evidence and brought it to a law office downtown in Philadelphia. I was met by Attorney Grant, mid-40s, who looked like he'd seen more divorces than family dinners. After reviewing the documents, he slowly shook his head. "I understand your frustration, Leah, but most of these funds were transferred from a shared account. There's no documentation showing it was a loan or any binding agreement. Legally, this falls under marital assets. Without proof of fraud or coercion, it's hard to reclaim." "So, I've lost it all?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Not entirely, but you need to prepare yourself. Sometimes justice doesn't come from court, it comes from your own choices." I thanked Mr. Grant and left in silence. On the way home, the bitter March wind whipped through my thin coat, but inside, I didn't feel cold anymore. Just one burning thought. I won't let them walk over me like a doormat. The weeks that followed, I lived like a shadow. By day I taught as usual, smiling at students, attending parent meetings, jotting notes in gradebooks. By night I studied, not to teach but to become someone else. I started reading everything I could find about finance, investing, corporate law. I signed up for online courses, binge-watched podcasts on business strategy, personal branding, and behavioral psychology. I didn't just want to understand Mason and his family. I wanted to rise above them. I started crafting a new identity, Elena Moore, a short, sharp name. Elena was the woman Leah had never dared to become. Confident, calculated, and answerable to no one. I hired a web designer, built a polished LinkedIn profile, Elena Moore, independent investment consultant specializing in post-crisis business recovery. I used my real skills combined with my new knowledge to write financial analysis articles and share business strategies like I'd once worked on Wall Street. An old college friend, Benji, now a freelance marketing expert, helped me shape Elena's public image. He didn't know the whole story, just assumed I was rebuilding my career after a broken marriage. "You're glowing," Benji said, looking over my new headshots in a beige suit, studio lights casting soft shadows on my sharp cheekbones. "People will believe Elena Moore could turn an empire around." I smiled, but there was no joke in my heart. That's exactly what I was preparing to do. Elena Moore started showing up at small networking events, investment panels, tech startup meetups in Midtown. I didn't talk much, but I listened a lot. I took note of names, connections, familiar partners tied to the Thompsons, the financial empire Mason's family clung to. They didn't know who I was, but I knew them well. I knew about their hidden investments, their shady connections, the late-night phone calls Mason thought I didn't hear. I was no longer Leah, the wife who stood behind a family that never welcomed her. I was Elena, the woman tracing every thread on the power map, ready to pull at the weakest stitch. With my new identity, I slipped into the world I once only observed from the sidelines. Rooftop cocktail parties, closed-door investor summits where whispers held more weight than words. Philadelphia wasn't New York, but the finance scene had its own rules, and I learned them fast. I didn't get too close, but I stayed close enough. I wasn't in the center of the room, but always in the right place to overhear a key conversation, a passing joke, a furrowed brow mid-chat, a hesitant glance. All of it I remembered. I knew their last name wasn't Thompson like in the story. Mason's family name was Bradley. And they didn't just run an investment firm. They were the public face of the Bradley Foundation for Progress, praised across media for their generous donations to schools and hospitals. The problem was, I started hearing stories that didn't match up. One night after a tech conference, I ran into Miles, an old college classmate now working as a strategic advisor for nonprofits. Over coffee, as we caught up, the conversation drifted to the Bradley Foundation. I asked casually, like it was a name I'd just heard in passing. Miles frowned. "I worked with them last year." Something felt off. The funding report said one thing, but the actual disbursements told another story. Nobody wants to dig deeper because they're too powerful. I didn't react, just nodded slightly, but inside it was like a spark landing on dry kindling. I went home, turned on my laptop, and started tracing the Bradley Foundation's financial trail. What I found wasn't public, but it was enough to raise alarms for anyone with a sharp mind. Donations reaching into the hundreds of thousands were funneled to shell organizations that existed only on paper. I saved every document, every figure, building a spreadsheet as if prepping for a courtroom presentation. But to dig deeper, I needed someone with real skills. I called Aiden, an old high school friend, now a private investigator. We'd lost touch for years, but when I showed up as Elena, he didn't recognize me. I told him I was an investor suspicious of being used in a shady real estate deal tied to the Bradleys. Aiden agreed to help. He was discreet, didn't ask too many questions, but I knew he suspected something. Still, he was a professional, and that's all I needed. 3 weeks later, Aiden handed me things I couldn't have imagined. "They're not just mismanaging the foundation," he said, passing me a USB drive. "They've set up a whole web of shell companies in Delaware to avoid taxes, launder money, and legitimize dirty foreign investments." I opened the files. Internal emails, wire transfer records, loosely encrypted memos. They all unfolded before me like a grim gray mosaic. "And that's not all," Aiden added, his voice dropping. "Remember Nathaniel Bradley? The so-called eccentric uncle who supposedly died in a car crash 3 years ago?" I nodded. Back when I was still Mason's wife, I had met him once at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. A gruff but sharp man who clearly didn't care for the flashy lifestyle of his younger relatives. Aiden sighed. "There were a lot of red flags with that crash. I found the original forensic report. It was altered. And the driver they hired at the time? Disappeared a week later." I gripped the edge of the table. Everything started to align. Why Mason left right after the debt was paid off. Why his family never seemed genuinely worried about losing their home. Why their resentment toward me was so poorly concealed. It was because I didn't belong in their world. A world built on money, power, and dark secrets no one dared to expose. But I would. I sat alone in the apartment, night pressing against the glass windows. The USB stick was still plugged into my laptop, its blue light blinking like a heartbeat waiting to erupt. This wasn't personal anymore, this was a chessboard, and whether I was Leah or Elena, there was no turning back. They had played me like a pawn. Now it was my move. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. The information I had was a bombshell, but unless someone had the platform to expose it, all that data would remain lifeless digits. And I knew exactly who could turn it into a weapon. Janet Rivera, 28, investigative journalist for the Philadelphia Chronicle. I had read her exposé last year on the city council budget scandal. It forced a councilman to resign in under a week. Janet was young, razor-sharp, and most importantly, unafraid. I sent her an email with the subject line "Confidential. The city's largest charity may be a front for financial fraud." Under the name Alina Moore, I attached a few select documents from Aiden's USB and added one line: "If you want to know more, I have an entire drive full of this." Less than an hour later, my phone rang. "Moore?" Janet's voice was crisp. "I'd like to meet in person." We met at a quiet cafe near the train station. Janet wore a leather jacket, her hair in a high bun, her eyes sharp enough to slice through lies. "I've read what you sent," she said bluntly. "If this checks out, it could shake the entire city council. What do you want out of this?" I took a sip of coffee, locked eyes with her. "I don't want money. I want the truth out. I want them to pay." Janet nodded. "I'll need to verify the sources, cross-section the records, and confirm with at least 3 independent leads. If it holds, I'll publish." I handed her the hard drive after backing everything up at home, and a list of contacts who could corroborate the details. Miles from the nonprofit world, a former accountant at Bradley Group who resigned for personal reasons, and an admin worker who once accidentally printed a payroll sheet listing a special operations expense charged to the foundation. For the next 2 weeks, Janet and I worked almost every night. I supplied the data, she dug into the details. Aiden helped verify the evidence, and Benji, my marketing friend, helped prepare the social media rollout. We weren't going to leak it carelessly. We planned a step-by-step media assault. Day 1, the Philadelphia Chronicle ran a front-page exclusive with the headline, "Bradley Foundation, Are Donations Failing to Reach Those in Need?" The next day, I activated a network of anonymous social media accounts I had prepared across Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit. Each account had its own voice: a disgruntled teacher, a supposed ex-employee, a cautious investor. We posted links to the article, asked open-ended questions, attached images, leaked docs, and comments designed to strike a nerve. If they used charity money to fund a director's vacation home, then who can we trust anymore? This foundation's been honored by the city 3 years in a row. Has anyone here ever actually received their support? The post went viral. Within 48 hours, what started as a newspaper article exploded across platforms like wildfire during a dry summer. Local TV stations picked it up, interviewing scholarship recipients, many of whom revealed there were no actual disbursement records from the foundation. Shares of Bradley Holdings, the foundation's parent company, dropped steadily for 3 days. On the 4th day, I dropped the hammer. An old video clip Aiden had recovered from a security camera showing Nathaniel Bradley storming out of the director's office the day before his accident. In the video, he slammed a folder onto a desk and shouted, "I won't let you keep laundering money under the guise of charity." I sent the clip to Janet. Within an hour, it was the top story across every news platform. The fallout was immediate and explosive. The mayor's office called for a multi-agency investigation. Business partners like Wells and Braxton and Monroe Capital announced they were suspending all dealings with Bradley Holdings. City Council scheduled an emergency hearing. Bradley's stock plummeted, over 40% lost in just 1 week. A company once praised as a symbol of corporate citizenship was now hanging in disgrace under the weight of public outrage. Mason, the man who walked out of my apartment without a glance, appeared on television looking gaunt, reading a scripted statement with zero confidence. "We deny all allegations. The company will cooperate fully with authorities to resolve this misunderstanding." I sat in my tiny apartment, wine glass in hand, watching the evening news show. Mason and his parents, leaving their office building, swarmed by reporters. No one could say I didn't belong in their family now. The media firestorm was just the beginning. If I truly wanted to bring down the Bradley empire, I couldn't rely solely on outside pressure. I needed to strike from within. And for that, I needed a Trojan horse. Her name was Ella Bradley Mason's younger sister. Ella had always been the most overlooked member of the family, rarely seen at major events, held no key position in the company, often dismissed as the artsy one who doesn't fit in, which made her the perfect pressure point. I approached Ella not as Leah, the betrayed ex-wife, but as Elena Moore, a generous, empathetic investor. We met for the first time at a small charity auction inside an independent art gallery. She was showcasing a series called The Rot of Power, ironically exactly my theme of interest. I posed as an art enthusiast, gently asked about her inspiration, and subtly steered the conversation toward what it felt like to be trapped by family expectations. Ella smiled sadly. "You get it," I said, eyes shining just enough. "Some families use blood to bind you, but money to control everything." After 3 coffee dates, Ella began opening up about family fights. About how Mason and her father always saw her as useless, and how her mother, Evelyn Bradley, only cared about appearances. I didn't need to push much. Ella was desperate to be heard, and I was waiting for someone ready to speak. I sent her a packet, hand-picked withdrawals from the Bradley Foundation, clearly naming Mason, Richard, Mason's father, and Evelyn as beneficiaries. But the section related to Ella? Completely blank. "Why isn't my name on here?" she asked, bitterness in her voice. "Maybe because they didn't think you were smart enough to notice," I replied coolly. A few days later, Ella sent me a recording of an internal meeting she had secretly taped, where Mason flatly said Ella should stay out of company affairs. "The less she knows, the better." That was the perfect moment to strike again. From Aiden's data, I found photos of Richard Mason's father frequently visiting a luxury condo in Rittenhouse. He wasn't alone, but with a woman nearly 30 years younger named Lena Morgan, who used to be the foundation's administrative assistant. I sent the photos to Evelyn's private inbox, along with account statements showing Richard had withdrawn tens of thousands of dollars from a Bradley Holdings subsidiary to cover Lena's rent and personal expenses. 3 days later, the media reported that Richard had left the family estate in the middle of the night, empty-handed, face bruised. A source from the gardening staff revealed there had been shouting from the second floor. Then the scream, "I gave my whole life to you, and this is how you repay me?" The picture-perfect marriage cracked. Evelyn, the same woman who once told me I wasn't good enough for Mason, was now publicly calling her husband a morally bankrupt traitor. The family began to split. Ella officially resigned from the Bradley Foundation's board, declaring she refused to be involved in unethical operations. At a separate press conference, she stated flatly, "I used to believe in my family. Now, I choose the truth." But the final blow came in the form of a single document. Aiden had spent months tracing through layers of shell companies in the Bahamas and the Cayman Islands. At last, we uncovered an offshore account holding more than $23 million under Evelyn and Richard's names, funded by transfers from organizations previously supported by the Bradley Foundation. I printed every page, timestamped the files, encrypted the data, and sent it to the FBI, the IRS, and the Securities and Exchange Commission under the name of an anonymous citizen who had witnessed too much injustice. Just 3 days later, I saw it on national news. FBI launches formal investigation into Philadelphia's largest charity amid allegations of money laundering, tax fraud, and illegal funding practices. Bradley Holdings stock continued to plummet. International partners withdrew all investments. A company once seen as the Northeast financial titan now stood on the brink of collapse. I sat in front of my TV, hands wrapped around a cup of hot tea, watching Evelyn, dark sunglasses on, surrounded by reporters as she climbed into a car. Their empire was now nothing but rubble, division, and suspicion. I used to be the outsider, dismissed, stepped on. Now they had severed their own roots, with their own hands. Just when I thought I had uncovered nearly everything about the Bradley family, a completely unexpected twist arrived. One June morning, while reviewing financial summaries I planned to send to the IRS, my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice wasn't. "Leah," or should I say Elena Moore, a low male voice confident with a mocking chuckle. "Word is, you're driving the Bradley family insane." I paused for a few seconds before responding cautiously. "Who is this?" "I'm Mark Bradley," the man said. "Mason's cousin, the one they scrubbed from every family photo since I turned 25. I vaguely remembered the name from some of Aiden's old files. Mark had once been a top financial analyst, but after an internal conflict he vanished from the company. No reason, no explanation? "Why are you calling me?" I asked, half curious, half wary. I have information, and I think you're the one who knows how to use it. We agreed to meet later that afternoon at a high-end bar in Rittenhouse. Not too exposed, not too discreet. Mark arrived right on time. Clean-cut shirt, slicked-back silvering hair. His gaze was cold, but behind it, a fire had clearly been burning for years. You did what I thought no one outside this family could, Mark said with a hint of admiration. You've shaken them to their core. But they're not finished yet. I stayed quiet, he continued. You know about the foundation, the offshore accounts, the cover-ups. But there's one thing you've missed. The real estate laundering trail Richard and Mason used, small companies in Detroit and Houston. Mark pulled up a tablet showing transaction logs with strange corporate names. Clearwave Partners, L&K Advisory, and Haven Realty, all of them tied back to the Bradley Group through shadowy investment loans with no traceable origin. These names never show up in the official audits, Mark said, his tone darkening. I found out once. When I asked Mason directly, I was fired 2 weeks later, no explanation. My parents received a very generous settlement to keep quiet. I sat there, heart pounding. The full picture was becoming clearer and more terrifying. So, why come back now? Mark smirked, lifted his glass of whiskey and slowly swirled it. Because you did what I couldn't, hit their pride. Now, I don't want to see them just lose money or their image. I want them to lose the one thing they thought was untouchable: power. I looked at the man across from me, unsure if I could trust him completely, but one thing I knew for certain. Insiders were gold when you're dismantling an empire. 2 days later, something even more unexpected happened. I was leaving a finance seminar when I received a text from another unknown number. Go to the basement parking lot of the Belmont Hotel. I know who Leah is. I'm not here to threaten you. I went, alert and cautious, phone in hand with the emergency call screen ready. Under the dim garage lights, a figure stepped out from a black SUV. I recognized her instantly. Evelyn Bradley. She wore a light fur coat, her hair pinned back. Her eyes no longer carried the arrogance from the first time we met at the family estate. Hello, Leah, she said, not even pretending I was someone else. I know it's you behind all of this. And I'm not here to beg. I frowned, unsure what to expect. I used to think I controlled everything, Evelyn said slowly, but I realized I was just a pawn in a game my husband and son had rigged. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a transcript of a recording. Richard and Mason discussing how to delay investigations, manipulate public perception, and move assets before they get frozen. Because I never signed certain papers, some assets are still under my name, and now, I want to help you end this. I stood silently, hand clenched around the folder. There was a time when I saw Evelyn as the icy matriarch no force could shake, but now, all I saw was a woman discarded by the very people she'd protected. Maybe she wasn't good, but sometimes the ones who've been burned the worst make the best allies. I looked at her and gave a slow nod. We're ending this together. And for the first time in a very long while, I knew I wasn't fighting alone. The day I had waited for over a year finally arrived. The Bradley Holdings board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Monday, inside the towering glass building in the heart of Philadelphia. Once a monument to their power and prestige, but that morning, it was nothing more than the stage for a downfall no one could stop. I walked into the boardroom in a sleek black suit, hair pulled back, eyeliner sharp. No one recognized the Leah they once knew, the silent wife at dinner tables, enduring cold stares and colder silences. Today, I was the one calling the shots. The room gleamed under ceiling lights, men in tailored suits seated around the long wooden table. Mason sat at the head, pale, jaw tight the moment he saw me. Richard tried to remain composed, but I saw his eyes flick toward me with barely concealed fear. I set my leather case on the table, opened it and calmly laid out thick files along with a USB drive. I'll only need a few minutes, I said, steady and clear. I hold in my hands all the evidence of financial fraud, money laundering, charitable fund abuse, and shareholder manipulation by Bradley Holdings over the past 7 years. The room froze. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't let him. I have proof you moved nearly $23 million into offshore shell companies. I have recordings of you and Mason discussing how to disguise these transactions through the foundation. I have bank statements, internal memos, even phantom payroll records you used to hide illegal expenses. Richard slammed his hand on the table. You don't have the authority. I don't need authority, I said, locking eyes with him. I have the truth. I handed the USB to Ella, now an independent shareholder after severing family ties, then turned to Mason. He didn't say a word, he just looked at me, eyes filled with dread, and maybe a hint of regret. But regret wouldn't save him. Right then the doors burst open. 3 FBI agents stepped in, followed by 2 IRS officials. One of them pulled out a warrant, voice firm. Richard Bradley, Mason Bradley, and 2 other board members, you are under investigation for money laundering, tax fraud, abuse of power, and shareholder deception. Please cooperate. The room turned to ice. Some reached for their phones. Others backed away. I simply stood still, watching the moment I had envisioned so many times come to life. Richard was cuffed first. He resisted, but they dragged him up anyway. Mason was told to rise. As the agent snapped the cuffs on his wrists, he looked at me. Leah, he whispered. Why you? I stepped forward, voice calmer than ever. Because you made that choice, the day you walked out of our apartment and left me behind, after I sold everything I had for your family. He closed his eyes, I turned away. The elevator ride taking them downstairs felt like a one-way exit. Reporters were already waiting outside, the flashes like lightning strikes. The crimes were no longer buried in data files. They were front-page news. Within a week, Bradley Holdings stock hit record lows. Partners pulled out, banks froze assets, the court opened Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings. The empire Richard spent 30 years building collapsed like a sandcastle in a storm. When the boardroom door closed behind the final steps of the FBI agents, I thought I'd feel satisfied. But what filled me wasn't triumph, it was emptiness. A strange, cold silence, like I was standing in the wreckage after the storm, left alone with the ruins inside myself. I had spent over a year becoming Samantha Taylor, the cold, sharp, fearless woman. But once the mask was no longer needed, I realized with a jolt, I'd forgotten who Leah was. I couldn't go back to teaching. I couldn't walk into a coffee shop without someone whispering. Those who once admired me as Samantha now looked uncertain around the woman behind it all. Leah, the woman who brought down a powerful family. And I stood frozen between those names, unsure which one was truly mine. The nights stretched long and breathless. I didn't cry, I wasn't angry, I just felt empty. Until one afternoon Alex stopped by. He placed a worn notebook on my table, the edges frayed. Back then, he said gently, you used to write down all your dreams in here. You said you wanted to open a place to support women who were financially deceived. Remember that? I was silent for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Alex smiled softly. Then maybe now's the time to really do it. That idea sparked something in me, small, but enough to start over. 3 months later, the Leah Foundation was officially established. My goal was to support victims of financial abuse, especially women, who so often suffer in silence in unfair relationships. The foundation didn't just offer free legal counseling but also financial literacy courses, and most importantly, it helped women reclaim their voice. Janet, the journalist who stood by me throughout the journey, suggested we co-write a book. We titled it The One in the Shadows. I told everything from sleepless nights at the desk to that heavy walk into the boardroom. No dramatic language, just truth, raw, honest, and enough. The book became a phenomenon, not because it exposed a scandal but because it said what so many had felt but never said aloud. No one deserves to be silenced. I slowly let go of Samantha Taylor. No more carefully curled hair, no more sharply tailored suits. I went back to simple dresses, loosely tied hair, and a voice no longer hardened by steel. But I knew I wasn't the old Leah, the woman who once blindly believed empty promises. I was a new Leah, someone who understood the value of every time she stood back up, every time she was knocked down, and every word she chose to speak. 1 year after Bradley Holdings filed for bankruptcy, I was invited to speak at the Leah Foundation's fundraising gala. The room glowed with candlelight, filled with people who had once been deceived, betrayed, but were now sitting here, smiling, still moving forward. I stepped onto the stage, no headset mic, no spotlight theatrics, just me, Leah, real, standing among the real. I used to think once I got my revenge I'd feel powerful, I began, my voice soft but steady. But the truth is, afterward I just felt lost. I didn't know who I was without the anger. The room was completely still. But then I realized strength isn't about taking down an empire. Strength is having the courage to rebuild yourself from the ashes. It's looking in the mirror every day and choosing to forgive yourself, not for your past, but because you deserve a future. I took a deep breath and smiled. Today, I am not Samantha Taylor. I am no longer a victim. I am not someone's revenge. I am Leah, the woman who rose from the darkness and now walks beside others as they rise from theirs. Under the warm golden lights, the applause came, not loud, but strong enough to let me know this journey had never been in vain. Leah's story wasn't just about revenge against a powerful family. It was about rediscovering herself after betrayal and heartbreak. From a woman who was used and abandoned, she rose up, took down an empire, and then rebuilt herself to help others like her. In the real world, that story reminds us, our wounds don't define us. How we rise from them is what truly makes us who we are. What do you think about Leah's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about life and the secrets families keep.